Alright, so in this video tutorial, we're going to practice loops in R. There are two commonly used loops in R, which are for loops and while loops. In this video tutorial, we're going to talk about for loops, but in the next video, we're going to talk about while loops. So let's make a command. So this is going to be for loops. For loops is the most commonly loops in R, and the purpose of for loops is to repeat some tasks for a specific number of iterations. So the general syntax for loops is first we begin with the keyword for and open and close parentheses. Within the parentheses, you will have an index variable. It can have any name, but most of the time we use I, short for iteration. You don't need to set this index variable beforehand. And then you will have the keyword in. Then you will have a collection of items. Okay, so here we will have collection of items. It can be a vector, it can be a list, it can be a sequence, it can be even a data frame. And after that, you will have to open and close curly bracket. And within the curly bracket, you will have your commands. Okay, so it can be one statement, two statement, or more than that. Okay, so it doesn't really matter. So for each element in this collection of item, for example, for each element in this vector, in this sequence, or generally a collection of item, the commands will be executed. So for example, I'm going to print, so from the value 1 to 20, I'm going to print the square root of the values. Okay, so instead of saying 1 squared 2 and then 2 squared 2 all the way up to 20 squared 2, I'm going to use for loops to print the values for me. Okay, so first of all, I use the keyword for I in, and here is a collection of items which gets the value from 1 to 20. Okay, so and then I'm going to open and close curly brackets, and here I'm going to say print I squared. Okay, so what's going to happen? Let me run this line of code. You will see that it will print the value of the 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, all the way up to 20 squared. What is happening here? First of all, your index variable is I, and your collection of your item is from 1 to 20. Okay, so I gets the first element in this collection of items. I gets the value of 1. Then after I gets the value, then goes inside the curly bracket and runs everything, which is print I squared, print 1 squared, and then prints 1. Then I gets the second value, which is 2 in this element, and then prints 2 squared, which is 4. I gets the third value, which is 3, and then prints 3 squared, which is 9. And this process continues until the last element in this collection of data, which is I gets the value of 20 and prints 20 squared, which is 400. So there is no other items in this collection of data. So the for loop is going to be stopped and jumps after the this curly brackets. Okay, so which is line 12. Okay, so if I run this line of code, so after done, you can see that it jumps to the line 12. So here you could print more than one item. Okay, so here I just printed I squared. You could print, for example, I and print, sorry. Here you could print I and I squared. But since it is more than 2 values for print, I have to use the concatenation C command. And then if I run this line of code, it's going to print I and I squared. Okay, so I is going to be 1, so prints 1 and 1 squared. Okay, I is going to be 2, 2 and 2 squared, which is 4. I is going to be 3, 3 and 3 squared, which is 9. All the way up to I is 20 and prints 20 and 20 squared, and then there's nothing, and then jumps to line 12. You could also, for example, print the value, raise the value to the power of 3. Okay, so print I squared, and I cubed. So now if you run this line of code, it's going to be the same. 1, 1, 1, 2, 2 squared, 2 cubed. 3, 3 squared, 3 cubed, all the way up to 20, 20 squared, and 20 cubed. So you could also define this vector, this collection of item outside of the for loop. Okay, so for example, here I could say that this one is x, okay, and then I would say that x is from 1 to 20. So x is from 1 to 20. For each item in this x, run this line of code. So I'm going to get the same result. Okay, so you could either define this collection of item in the for loop or outside the for loop before the for loops. For example, let's say I want to from the value 1900 to 2022, I'm going to print the values. Okay, so I could say that for I in 1900 to 2022, just print I. Okay, print I, and then that's it. So the value is going to be printed from 1900 to 2022. But here I could, for example, use the variable, I don't know, years, and here I could define it as years. Years is from 1900 to 2022. Run this code and it's going to get the same result. I'm going to modify this line of code so that it prints this year is 1900, this year is 1901, this year is 1902, 03, all the way up to 2020. Okay, so how can I do that? If I want to do it, if I don't use the loop, it's going to be a tedious task without using loop. But instead of typing it 123 times, you could use for loops. For example, here I could say that for I in years, which is 1900 to 2020, print paste. So if I use print paste, I'm going to say that print paste this year is, so this value is going to be printed always, is a constant value that is going to be printed for each iteration. And then I'm going to say I. Okay, so this year is 1900, this year is 1901, this year is 1902, all the way up to this year is 2022. Okay, so now let's run this line of code. So this year is print paste, and don't forget that you're gonna have another, you have to close the parentheses for print to 2022 and then 4. So now you'll see that it says this year is, so this value is going to be pasted, it's going to be always printed, and then the value of I, which is 1900. This year is 1901, 1902, all the way up to the last one. This year is I, which is 2022. So you could also loop over characters. Okay, for example, let's say I have a list of characters. So let's say I have a vector called fruits, and then I'm gonna save a list of a vector of characters. Okay, for example, mango, and I have apple and orange and banana and lemon. Okay, so I have a vector of called fruits and it's a character. Okay, I'm gonna loop over each element in this vector. Okay, so if you run this code, it's been added here, or I could use list, doesn't really matter. Okay, and here I'm gonna print paste I love mango juice, I love apple juice, I love orange juice. I'm not gonna type it each time, so I'm gonna use for I in what, in a list of item, in collection of item, which is fruits, right? Fruits. I'm gonna say that print paste, and here I'm gonna say I love, so it's this one be always gonna be repeated. I love what, the each element, which is I is gonna be the first, gets the first element, second element, third, all the way up to the lemon, and then I'm gonna have the word juice. Okay, so fruits is this value for, and you can see that I love mango juice, I love apple juice, and all the way up to the lemon juice. So for each, I gets the first element in fruits, which is mango. Okay, and then goes inside here and then prints I love, which is always is a constant value, which will be printed, and then mango juice. That's the first one. I gets the second item in this object fruits, okay, so which is apple. So print paste I love and then apple juice. Gets the third item, which is orange. I love orange juice, all the way up to the last item, which is lemon. Most of the time you want to use the output of each iteration for future analysis, okay? So in the example, in the first example that we used, that we calculated the squared of the values from 1 to 20, I'm going to store the actual results and then find, for example, the standard deviation of them. I'm going to have the actual result for each iteration, okay? So how can I do that? You have to use an empty container, okay, that stores the result of each iteration, for example, from 1 to 20. So the container, first of all, is gonna be an empty container. So it doesn't have anything, okay? So I'm gonna have it with the length of 20. Okay, so again, if I look at the container, so it's just 0 20 times, okay? So I'm going to say that the first element of the container is going to be I squared. The second element of the container, it's going to be 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, all the way up to 20 squared, okay? So again, it's going to be a very simple for loop, okay, for I in 1 to 20, okay? So here I'm going to say that container, I have to use indexes, okay? That container, so the first element, the second element, the third element, the fourth, all the way up to 20. So the i's element in the container is going to be I squared. If I look at the container, so container, first of all, is just nothing, 0 0 0 20 times, okay? So when I is 1, it's going to be 1 squared. It's going to be the first element of the container. I gets the second value 2. 2 squared is going to be the second element of the container, and all the way up to the 20. Okay, so now if you look at the container, so the first element of the container is going to be 1 squared. The second element of the container is going to be 2 squared, all the way up to the 20th element. It's going to be 20 squared, and that's it. And now I can, for example, do some calculation, find the standard deviation of the container. Okay, so that's how we can use the output for each iteration in the for loop. So what if the vector, so the values that I had started from 1? Okay, what if the vector doesn't start from 1? Okay, and in that case, it will not return appropriate result if I use this process. Okay, for example, let's say the vector, I want to have the squared values from 10 to 20, okay? So container is, let's say it's the length is 10, doesn't matter because it's 10, 11, 12, and so on, right? Or it can be 20, doesn't really matter. Let me give it 20. And then, so I is gonna be 10, so container, the element number 10 is gonna be hundreds, okay? So element 1, 2, 3, 4, there's not going to be any change on them, okay? But element number 10, it starts from element number 10. So if I run this line of code, you can better see that. So element 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 container, element number 10 is going to be 10 squared, 11 squared, all the way up to 20 squared, okay? So this is not the result that we are looking for, okay? So how can I address this issue? So in this case, it is better to save the collection of items, which is this value, in an object, okay? And then work based on indexes for that object, okay? For example, the first element, so I'm gonna store this in an object, for example, x is this value, right? So I'm going to say that instead of working with the I from 1 to n, so I'm going to say that this loop starts from the first element in the object x, the second element in the object x, the third element in the object X all the way up to the last element in the object S. And the last element in the object X is the length of object X, right? Because it shows the number of the elements, okay? So the way that I'm gonna approach this one, if I don't know what is the length of the container, for example, I can say that it's gonna be, so I can define it after X. So the container, so X is, for example, from 10 to 20, so the container is gonna be numeric. What is the size of the container is going to be the length of X. And here, I'm going to say that it starts from the first element in the object X all the way up to the last element in the object X, which is, again, the length of X. Okay? And here, so let me close this one. And here, I'm going to say that container, the first element in the object container is going to be the first element in the object X squared, the second element in the object X. So I'm going to work with the indexes. Okay, so the first element in the object X squared is going to be the first element in the container. The second element in the object X is going to be the squared, is going to be the second element in the container, all the way up to the length of X, which is going to be, so how many times it's going to be repeated, like the last one. So the last element in the object X squared is going to be the last element in the container. So if I run this line of code, container, and then if you look at the container, so now you're not going to have any problem. So working with the indexes is very powerful. So you don't have to worry about the length of the container. You don't have to worry about the number of iterations, okay, or whether it begins from 1 or not, okay. So if you work with the indexes, it is much more powerful than working with the actual values. So the next important topic in for loops is nested loop, okay. So nested for loops, sometimes you may have a for loop inside a for loop, okay. So I have for I in 1 to 5, open and close curly bracket, and there is another inner loop for j in 6 to 8, okay, open and close curly bracket, and I'm gonna type print I and j, I comma j, but since it is more than 2 values, so I'm gonna use C command, concatenation, I and j. So let's see how this works, okay, how this nested loops works. So the way that the nested loop work is, first of all, I gets the first element in this list, which is 1, okay, and when I is 1, it goes inside the inner loop and completes looping over all items in this inner loop, okay. So I is 1, right, so j is going to be 6, so and then prints 1 and 6. J is going to be 7, prints 1 and 7. But j is going to be 8, prints 1 and 8. 1 6, 1 7, 1 8. Then, so we're done with the inner loop. So I goes back and I gets the second element, which is 2, and then goes inside the inner loop. So I is 2, j is 6, j is 7, j is 8. There's nothing for the inner loop. I is going to be 3, 3 6, 3 7, 3 8. I is going to be 4, 4 6, 4 7, 4 8. I is going to be 5, 5 6, 5 7, 5 8. Okay, so this process will continue until I is the last element here, which is 5, and j is the last element for the inner loop, which is 8. Okay, so that's how the nested loops work. So now let me modify this code so that I'm gonna type I plus j. Okay, and now let's run this line of code. I is going to be 1, j is going to be 6, 1 plus 6 is going to be 7. I is going to be 1, j is going to be 7. Add them up, going to be 8. And so I'm going to say that print paste. So I'm going to say that print paste I, first of all print I, and then print the word plus. Okay, and then print j, and then print equals to. Okay, and then print I plus j. Okay, so I plus j. First of all, prints I, which is 1, plus the second one is j equals to, so these values are going to be always printed in each iteration, and then print I plus j. So now let's run this line of code. Okay, so I, j, print paste, I, j, and so on. Okay. So I is 1, right? And j is 6, j is 7, j is 8, right? So you can also use conditional statement that we already talked about, that if-else conditional statement within the for loops, okay? For example, we would like to see how many even numbers are within a vector. For example, I have a vector like 2, 1, 37, 107, 28, 12, 13, and 14, because I have this vector. I'm gonna see how many even numbers are here. Okay, so I have to loop over each element of this vector and then divide it by 2. If the modulus was 0, then it's gonna be even. Okay, so if the modulus, so I'm gonna use the if-else statement within the for loops. Okay, and I'm gonna see how many numbers are here, so I have to use a container, which is first of all, which is 0, and when it was even, one number will be added to it, okay? And otherwise it will not be added any number to the container. So first of all, so the container, for example, I'm gonna call it count, is 0, okay? I'm gonna say that for I in this list of item x, okay, I'm going to divide I if I modulus 2 was 0, okay, what does it mean? It means that I have to add one value to count. Okay, so count's gonna be count plus 1. Okay, so count gonna be count plus 1, and then here just type the value of count, how many values. So x is this value, count is 0, so I is gonna get the first value in x, which is 2. 2 modulus 2 is 0, yes, so it goes inside. So the result of this statement, this condition is true, so goes inside this curly bracket and adds one value to the count. So count's gonna be 1. I gets the second element, which is 1. And 1 modulus 2 is 0, no, so nothing is gonna happen. Okay, so I gets the third element, 37 modulus 2 is 0, no. So 107, no. 28 modulus 2 is 0, yes. So it counts, it will add one value to the count. Okay, so let's run this line of code, and now count is 4. Okay, so we can say that 2, 28, 12, and 14 are even numbers. Another thing is that you can break the loop using break syntax. For example, if an element in vector, so for example in this vector, if an element was 12, break the entire loop. Okay, so x is this value, so x is this value, so run this line of code. So I'm gonna say that for I in x, okay, so I'm gonna print I, but if what happened, if I was exactly 28, then what's gonna happen? Then break the entire loop. Okay, so what's gonna happen? So x was here, so let me copy it here so you can better see that. So x is this value. I gets the first element in x, which is 2, and then prints 2. Okay, is 2 exactly equal to 28? No, so it will not break the loop. 1 prints 1, 37 prints 37, 107 prints 107, 28 prints 28. Is 28 exactly 28? Yes, so it will break. So first it will print the 28 and then it will break it, and it will not continue, and then it will jump into the line 64. Okay, so if I run this line of code, you'll see that the result. Okay, so prints 2, 1, 37, 107, 28, because here print is first prints and then checks the condition. And then when it sees the break, it will break the entire for loops and jumps into the line 64. Okay, So you can so using break, you can stop the loop before it loops over all items.